Hello, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our Enhancing General Counsel Office Metrics webinar series presented by the Thomson Reuters Institute. I'm Bill Josten, one of the client managers, or not client managers, the content managers, rather, for the Thomson Reuters Institute. And I am joined once again by the incomparable Lizzy Duffy, our Senior Director for Client Relationships within the Institute. We're thrilled to be back with you for part 2 of this Metrics webinar series. Little bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being done in a little different format from the last one. This one, just due to a few things that arose, we had to do as a recorded webinar, so there won't be the opportunity for live Q&A the way that we normally like to do it, but we do have our email addresses included at the end of the presentation. And frankly, Lizzy and I are fairly easy people to find on the internet. So if you do have questions, our contact info will be at the end of the presentation, and please feel free to reach out to us at any point. We're happy to answer questions via email, set up some time for a quick call to make sure that you have all the information that you need following up from today's session. But with that, Lizzy, welcome back to part 2.
Thanks, Bill. And what an introduction. I like that. We have to do this more often.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, so as the slide says here, this is part 2 of this Enhancing General Counsel Office Metrics webinar series. Part 1 was broadcast in the last week of March, so a week ago, depending on when you are viewing this, or maybe longer. But part 1, we talked about sort of the 4 areas of responsibility for the General Counsel's office, thinking about how do we find metrics to speak to those 4 areas. What we're doing in today's session is taking some suggestions of metrics for those areas. These are not by any means the key metrics. They're just key metrics. It's not definitionally the only ones, but just for the way we're going to present this, we're going to create a bit of a story. And then we're going to walk through the process of how do you go from collecting a large pool of information about the performance of your law department and paring that down to really a one-slide story that tells the story of your law department for any given audience, whether it's senior leadership or other departments within the business, all the way up to the board of directors, and some of the nuances and things that you want to consider as you're evaluating the metrics that you've collected and you're thinking through how you put that story together. So it's probably helpful to start with a bit of a recap of where we left off from last time. If you've joined us for part 1 of this session, this will look very familiar to you, or frankly, if you've seen a lot of the content that the Thomson Reuters Institute has put out over the last several years, I highly encourage you to go back and look at it. It's available on demand. But what we wanted to talk about here, just as a starting point, was some examples of metrics for each of these key strategic priorities. And we use these 4 strategic priorities as sort of an overarching framework for the areas of responsibility within the corporate law department. You have to be effective in your operation. You have to be efficient in how you operate, so cost effective or cost efficiency, essentially. You have to protect the business. That's obviously a core function, if not the core function of the department. And at the same time, that ability to protect, or the desire to protect the business, has to be balanced with how you still enable the growth of the business. So looking at each of those 4 areas of responsibility that can be molded, as we'll see during our presentation today, to speak to the changing and evolving goals of the overall business. We're looking at a few sort of key metrics here that we recapped from the beginning, or we're recapping at the beginning of this presentation, but these came out of the last session that we did, where we're looking at things like employee engagement scores, matter outcome scores, different ways to benchmark your legal spend, how you map and mitigate risks, and your involvement as a general counsel's office in how you're enabling the strategic growth of the business and how you're helping to push the business forward into that next iteration of growth. So with that background in mind and sort of this framework in our minds, let's talk through an actual example that we've put together and how we plot this story in building out from what are the goals that we want to attain to how do we communicate our ability or how we actually performed against that. And really, how do we take what we do as lawyers and sort of in the way that we think in narrative and transform that into how do we communicate with the C-suite and the leadership of the business who largely thinks in numbers. So to do that, we've constructed a bit of a hypothetical example. We've invented a mythical company that we've called TriClad. And one, that sounds very, impressive. I like that, but it's really an anagram of TRI and Lizzy's initials and my initials. But so it's not as impressive as it sounds, but it has a nice ring to it, right? This Triclad Corp. The context for this is Triclad as a business in our hypothetical is in transition from being a B2B professional services business to creating larger online service offerings with a heavy focus on AI-driven solutions. Insert a lot of business models here, right? This is not an uncommon transition right now. The company experienced 5% organic growth in revenue in Q1 of 2025. So we have the most recent quarter results for our company, and we had pretty good results in terms of our performance. And we expect significant investment in AI to deliver significant returns throughout the rest of this fiscal year. Our fiscal runs Jan 1 to December 31, and company-wide, we're experiencing an expense challenge. Frankly, who isn't these days? The business has a small market share in Germany. We're considering a greater push into the EU market. We have key concerns around confidentiality of proprietary data for product development. We're working with a lot of outside vendors, and there's been maybe some bad experiences in the past that have us really focused in on that confidentiality element. And we recently experienced 2 large litigation matters, both IP related. We want to avoid those repeats. That's also part of the concern around that proprietary data. So as you look at the goals that the company has set for the year, they want to develop and launch a new AI-powered product suite into market by Jan 1 of next year. Worldwide, they want to grow revenue by 12% in 2026. So next year's revenue target, big target. And they want to also reduce operating expenses by 10% in key markets like the US and the UK, and by 5% in our emerging markets, which are France and Germany primarily. So we've got that framework for the overall business. That's how we're beginning our understanding of where the business stands and how we want to find alignment to that as the General Counsel's office. So let's translate that into the context for the GCO itself. For the law department, we're increasing our matter volumes year over year. Most law departments are, we're no exception. At the same time, staffing has stayed flat with relatively low turnover to the prior years, but because of that increasing matter volume, it's placing a bigger strain on everybody in the department just in terms of their working hours. One of the things that the law department has done over the last couple of years is made a major investment in what we're calling our legal front door. And it's an intranet portal for our internal users, our internal customers, to get legal assistance. We've worked with our risk function to roll out AI training to our sales teams because, one, our sales teams are using AI in their day-to-day work. Plus, we want them to have an understanding of the types of risks that our customers may be concerned about as we roll out our AI products. We're actively tiering work to lower cost law firms. We're taking a page in our general counsel's office from a lot of other general counsels doing a lot of the same thing. If you go back and look at some of the work that the Thomson Reuters Institute has done in our 2023, 2024, 2025 State of the Corporate Law Department reports, you'll see a lot of discussion of this idea of tiering work to lower cost law firms. We're no exception. That's what we're doing in our department as well. And by the way, I want to mention, this is the hypothetical Triclad department. We're not speaking for any priorities from Thomson Reuters Law Department. This is our hypothetical that we've created. Our hypothetical department is evaluating ALSPs with the idea that they could assist us with AI issue horizon scanning for risks and other things that we should be aware of. We're working to embed our GCO more closely with the strategic business units across Triclad so that we're getting a little bit closer to the functioning of the business and being more ingrained in some of those processes. And we recently conducted a feedback program looking at both internal and external stakeholders. What we're trying to do here in this exercise is present an annual presentation to the board of directors. The GC doesn't sit on the board, but works very closely with several key members. So we want to have that in mind. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we figure out how do we build this story. The first thing we have to do, though, is figure out what are the department goals. We've already looked at the corporation's goals, but what are the department goals that we want to be driving to this year? First key thing we want to keep in mind is we want to have alignment between the company's goals and the department's goals so that when we're presenting back to the board, we're not just talking about things that we thought were important for the law department to do. We want to make what's important for the law department in line with what the overall business is setting as important. We can do this through the framework of the 4 plates that we talked about before, and that's just our little internal reference form. We call them our 4 spinning plates. It's the 4 areas of responsibility that GCs have to keep spinning at all times. We can use that as a framework for how we monitor, but in terms of how we report and the goals that we're working towards that we're going to be reporting results on, we want those to be in alignment with the broader business. So we're talking about how does our department enable the development of that AI product to meet the target delivery date while also mitigating risk exposure. We want the law department to facilitate the sales cycle via training and technology to achieve a 10-day close for our sales teams. How do we enable that while still being able to do the other things we need to do in terms of effectiveness and protection of the business? We also want to optimize the efficiency of the legal department by supporting, we want to support that 12% revenue growth target. So we want to figure out how can we optimize efficiently internally to be able to attain that type of revenue growth. And then we've added a 4th goal category for the law department that's sort of our own internal goal that we want to be driving towards. But we want to innovate the delivery of legal services through better technology. That aligns very much with the other things that the business wants to accomplish, but it's something that we want to do as a yes and type goal for the law department. And as we think about all of that, okay, now we've got a lot of different things that we want to be monitoring. We have a framework to monitor that. We have goals that we want to be working towards. Now we can start figuring out how do we actually construct that story and how do we put those component parts together. So let's start talking through kind of the data that we've been gathering and how we start to parse through that to arrive at the ultimate story that we want to tell.
Yeah, and this is really about building the story, isn't it? It's a process, it's a time-consuming process, so you must set aside enough time to do this, because to get to that one slide story, you have to start with everything, all of your data. It takes a while to gather and collate it. It may be in different formats, it may be in different places, but you need to start with everything so you can then organize, prioritize, and decide which pieces are going to make it through into that final one slide story. So in terms of giving yourself plenty of time, there's also some other considerations and things that get in the way. So one of the things that I think is often a barrier to getting to your one slide story is that you might think everything matters. And so you've really got to think about how do you connect with your audience when you're building the story and when you're deciding what's important and what to prioritize in terms of your data points. The reality is you've got to focus on what the board needs and wants to hear and cut out anything that doesn't answer that brief. So finding a way to be really clear and concise and focused in your communication is a great skill, not just for the general counsel to hone, but also for everybody across the legal department. We've talked about this a lot, Bill, but lawyers tend to talk more in words. They'll add more words and often expand the question, whereas other business people are going to be more sort of transactional, more perfunctory. They will talk more in numbers, they'll get to the point faster, and they'll be looking for solutions to move on. So that's quite a generalization, but if you think of those two different worlds, what we are aiming for here is concise, clear, and actionable information. So from the part 1 piece that we learned, we know that we've got the 4 distinctive areas of the responsibility of the legal department. And one of the things we want to do in building this one slide story for the board is to actually showcase our value across all 4 of those areas. So not just the cost and efficiency piece, but the work that and the results that we're getting in being effective, the global approach that we're taking to protecting the business, and the value that we're adding in enabling the business too. Because this, after all, the exercise is a big opportunity to shift the narrative around the legal department as a cost center or the department of no, and move that to being seen as a department of how. So to do that, we've got to focus on outputs, not just the inputs. We've got to showcase proactivity, so not just responding to what the business asks us for. And we've also got to make sure that it's aligned to the business. So to do those things, we're going to work through the results of data that we've collected for TriClad's legal department and identify places where we can sharpen the narrative, reposition, and prioritize data. So let's dig in. We're going to start with effectiveness. This is dummy data that we've built out for our case study for our hypothetical company, TriClad. And not everyone is going to have the same volume or quality of data. So think about what you can reasonably gather and work with. Some of these data points might seem a bit more high tech and some might seem a bit more within reach. So hopefully there's a bit for everything. But we do want to think about as we go through this, are the data points presented in the most effective way to get our message across and to build our story? Are they easy to understand? Does it showcase the value that we add to the business? So we'll pick a few examples on each of the 4 slides to show how we can refine things. And I'm going to start with effectiveness metrics. So remember here, the legal department's in the role of a service provider. We've got 3 areas that as TriClad legal department we're focused on. That's the quality of advice, the service, so are we easy, fast and friendly to work with, and the talent piece, are we building the right expertise and skills and motivating people? The first piece to hone in on then is actually a great result. 40% of matters received a 10 out of 10 rating for how well the outcome met the original objective. Now, that sounds really great, but this could be better presented as a mean score. A mean score is easier to read, easier to understand, and it's better for benchmarking over time. The other thing is that by only talking about the 40% of matters, we're not representing the full data set here. So what I'd suggest is to go with the mean score. And then in a more detailed report, if you were doing that, you might use the 40% of matters as a sub-bullet. It doesn't tell the full story because if 40% of matters got a 10 out of 10, but then the other 60% only got a score of 1 out of 10, your average score is going to be a 4.6. So it's not such great news. So we want to be as representative and honest as possible, not just cherry pick. Then we've got another great result here. So the cycle time for our litigation claims has reduced by 10 days on average. Well, that's trending in the right direction, but what we don't know is where did it start? So has it reduced from 16 days down to 6 or from 150 down to 140? And those are quite different magnitudes of acceleration. The other piece is, you know, what point in time are we tracking this against? Is that, you know, compared with last quarter, compared with last year? Or is it since we did something different or introduced something new? And for our TriClad legal department, it is since we changed the process. So it's a positive result. Then in the service category, how easy it is to work with us. We've put a lot at TriClad, we've put a lot of effort into our legal front door and made a lot of progress on the NDA front. So we want to make it super clear to the board what that means. Here we've got a couple of data points. The legal front door has reduced NDA time to less than 15 minutes. Well, does the board know how long an NDA took before that or how long it should take? How do they know if that's good or bad? And why do they care is the other piece. And then the other thing is the NDA use is up 300%. And again, that issue sometimes when we're using percentages is that could be, it's gone from 1 person using it up to 3, or it could be much bigger. And in reality, it is much bigger. So what we want to tell as our story here is that as a result of this self-service tool that we've put in place, the NDA is being put in place in conversations faster and more often. And so that's accelerating the sales process, but it also means that we're better protected around our IP because we've got those NDAs in place. So there's some good news there, and we're going to see a few data points relating to this good news story as we go. Then on the talent side, we've got a great score. The employee net promoter score has increased to a positive 33. So again, let's give a benchmark, or if it's the first time we've surveyed and measured that, let's say that's our baseline. and we'll measure this on a quarterly basis. So giving a bit of context there. And then the last one, I love this one. The data point is that staff turnover has gone down 15% compared with historical data. So the loss of staff has reduced. Now that's two negative pieces in the same statement. Let's flip that to the positive. It still is true. It's still a true fact, but we can say that it's retention that has increased by 15%. And that's just a different way of looking at it. So sometimes we're, in the lawyer camp, we're a bit more negative or risk averse, but this is a positive news story.
Lizzy, if I could really quickly before we move off that
please.
slide, sorry, you could back up one slide for us, just really quick. Two thoughts on that. One, on that retention figure, that's a great point to make. Is it, do we want to present it where we're talking about the reduction, or do we want to talk about it in terms of the improvement? And I think a great way to take a key there is, what is the leadership's view to that, right? You talked about understanding the board's perspective and putting yourself in the board's shoes. So what's the goal as the board has defined it? Is the board's goal to reduce turnover or to improve retention? How have they framed it, and frame it to match, right? So having that idea in mind, that we can look at it two ways and still be honest about it, but we want to frame it the way that our board thinks about it. I think that's such a great example. And I love the way that you frame that. The other thing I was going to point out really fast is, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, we're bringing both lenses that we're trying to apply to this data into focus, right? We've got the 4 plates, but then framing out the legal department's goals. Those 4 focal areas, those are pretty consistent. Those are going to be the same. We always need to be effective. We always need to be efficient. We always have to protect. We always have to enable. But looking at those 4 focal areas through the lens of the goals that we're driving to as a department, I know when we originally built this and we're talking about it, that was how we wanted to build that, so that we had those frames of reference right there on the slide. And I think that's such a great way to present it, where it's just right there in front of you, so it's top of mind all the time. And people will notice as we move throughout the rest of the slides here, it's going to progress around those plates, but that focus on the goals remains consistent. So we're applying slightly different lenses to the information, but with the idea that we're telescoping down to that same goal.
Yeah, great point. And I think having the signposting as a visual is a really helpful piece to include. Obviously, this is a bigger deck than a one-slide story would be, but that can be a really helpful visual aid to keep people with you as you present. All right, so we're digging into efficiency metrics, and here our goal is to be seen beyond a cost center, but as an efficient operator. So we at TriClad have our 3 areas of target. We've got cost control, of course, efficiency, and then we want to use technology to speed things up and get better quality results. So some data points here. The first one, we've got a couple of points that relate to our total legal expenditure. So all the cost that accounts for what we spend externally and internally. How that breaks down between our internal and external as a ratio is something that shows you an efficiency and a cost reduction metric, and we can benchmark it. We talked a little bit about that in our part 1 webinar. So we're including this result on our metrics page, but we can combine these two, and we need to give a bit more context. So rather than having those 2 pieces broken out separately, let's combine it and state it as, we targeted a 40 to 60% of total spend being allocated internally, in line with our best practice for efficiency around legal spend, and that's now achieved. Or you could even condense that further to say we've hit our optimum efficiency target, and give the numbers. But let's look at how we can package those together. The second, again, it's 2 separate data points that are part of the same story point. So what I find with these 2 is it might even be a little confusing, because first we're saying the average external rate has increased by 6.4%. So, and then we're saying the average reduction in rate per timekeeper is 1.3%. What's happening here? The first point relates to market averages. So what we're seeing is that law firm rates are increasing at an average of 6.4%. But because at TriClad, we've been clever and we've been triaging work using lower cost firms, we've managed to bring down the average rate that we're paying our law firms by 1.3%. So by packaging those together, and again, this is where you need the time, and also you need not just one person doing this, but you need to be able to iterate, review, and edit to get it down to a really slick and packaged story. Last piece on that column is the final point we've got right down at the bottom of the list is actually the best result. So I would just put that right up at the start. In 95% of matters, we met our budget. That is fantastic news. So we're starting to think about how we prioritize and structure the data. Moving over to that technology side, there's 100% of NDA creation that is now automated. That's a great result. I just want to put a pin in that because that's part of our bigger NDA automation story. But on its own, as it stands there, the question the board would have is, who cares? Why does it matter? So we want to make sure that we pull that into the bigger story and answer the so what. Then 11% of the company has signed into Legal Front Door. Is that a good level of adoption? I'll be honest, when I first saw that number, I thought that probably feels quite low. So again, we want the context of what we were expecting. Did that meet, exceed, or come below our target, and in what period? And the last one, we had a TK acronym, and we've got an LFD acronym here. And don't assume that everybody speaks the same language that you do. Acronyms, where they're universally understood or they're specific to the business and everybody uses them. So we use TR at Thomson Reuters, for example, and that's pretty well understood. But unless it's universally understood by the audience, don't use it. Just spell it out. All right, so digging in then to the protect metrics, and this is a piece that we talked a lot about this, didn't we, Bill, that it can be difficult to get the right metrics around your protect activity and efforts, because more than anything, if you're doing a really good job of it, nothing happens. And so sometimes it's a bit like trying to prove a negative or measure something that's not there. So you get creative, but you also want to point out the efforts that are going towards things. So we've, for TriClad, we've identified our 3 goals here around risk discovery. So the extent to which we are mapping risk across the business and the coverage that we're providing. The risk management piece, so how we're deploying expertise to areas that we feel need more coverage or are exposed, and how that's tracking over time. And then the horizon scanning is really important. How are we helping the business to see around corners? So some great results in here, and just a couple of tweaks to suggest. 2 pieces we've highlighted here. One is risk mapping is conducted quarterly in evolving areas. And then the second in our risk management column, we've redeployed 1.5 FTEs to risk areas that were lacking coverage. Now, as they stand, they're fine, but what's really important is this is the stuff that captures the board's attention. So what I would say here is, while we're trying to reduce detail and make things more concise in general, this is a place where that extra detail and specific area of risk, name it. Let the board know what those emerging or unprotected areas of risk are that you are now addressing. That's really important for them and for you. Again, put the best results at the top of the list, make sure they get seen. And the same can be said for the most important. So it's not just about always making us look good, but there's no need to hide our value. So in this case, we've got a really strong coverage. 85% now of the SBUs are risk mapped, and we've been able to talk about how we've avoided quite a hefty penalty and fine through that risk mapping process. And then our 4th category is around enable, and the goal here we know is to enable the broader business's strategy, its vision and goals. And so we think about the value of the legal department here as a strategic leader. How are we showing up for the business? And so for TriClad, how we show up as a strategic leader is in the business as usual, how aligned and connected we are to the day-to-day of the business. It's how we show up on the commercial side. So how well we understand what the business is trying to achieve and how we help drive towards that. Often that links into sales. And then the third is more of the supporting business change. So what are the transformative initiatives that we need to strategically prepare and support the business through? And from TriCloud's perspective, a lot of that has to do with AI. So using the data to build the story here. We've got a few data points in that business as usual column that show how we're aligned and connected, and we're building relationships and we're building knowledge across the business and across our legal team. So we're inviting heads of other departments in to give updates to the legal team on a quarterly basis. 100% of those other departments now have a dedicated legal resource, so they know who to go to. We're building those relationships. And 90% of our department have participated in training on product pipeline. So the legal team is learning about other parts of the business. They're learning about the product vision and strategy. That means that we are all better able to map a path forward, find solutions, watch out for risk, and advise our business colleagues. So building relationships is really important here. And that leads us on to another great result that we've got in the commercial column, which is positive feedback from our stakeholder survey. We got an 8.9 rating for how well the legal department understands our business goals, and that's improved from 8.0. So again, if we want to refine that, we want to make it clear what the time period was of that improvement. And then over on the right, in the middle, coming back to our story around the NDA and the legal front door, we're really now pulling out data points that not just show what we did and when, but what the value of that was. So here it's really commercial, and it's showing that the legal department is getting NDAs into sales conversations, product development conversations faster and more often. So we've quantified that activity earlier by talking about how we've reduced the production of an NDA to 15 minutes. Now we're talking about how we're helping increase the competitive advantage of the business by getting into those conversations faster and keeping our IP safe. So we've got a few of those data points that connect around the NDA story, and it's not just the reduction in time. There's so much more value to be talking about. And then our last piece to pick up on here, and again, this comes back to what I mentioned on the previous slide around protect. There are some, when it comes to this last column, which is about the transformative initiatives that are of high strategic importance to the business, it's not just enough to say what we've done, but we've also got to talk about and what's next. And so this is where a little bit more detail is really beneficial in telling the board the story. So there's some great points here. Obviously, we, the legal department, have been very helpful to TriCloud. But what's next? So for example, how will we keep the EU AI Act updated and monitored? What's happening next with the roadmap? So we've sort of built it, but who needs now to review it? And then how does it get deployed? So with these protect and the enable metrics, I think it's just about thinking of the bigger picture and connecting it back into the story of the business. So let's take a look, Bill, at how we draw all of this together and start to organize it now into that one slide story by magic.
Yeah, well, hardly magic, more through a lot of trial and error and a lot of careful discernment. But I think that that whole series of slides that we just went through, that's a really great illustration of, let's start broad, right? Let's capture a lot of information. Let's track a lot of things. And like we talked about before, we're capturing in each of the 4 key focal areas. Now we want to apply the lens of the goals that we want to be talking about for this year, the things, because if you were trying to match aligned goals, or if you're trying to align with goals that your company is moving towards, your board has looked at that. Your leadership is moving towards that. If you can align the story of your department to that, well, now you're talking about really showing how you're driving the business forward in a meaningful way. So the challenge now is, I guess first challenge is understand the business's goals, align your goals to that. The second challenge is capturing a lot of information that and having the time to capture a lot of information to be able to think about and discern what best tells that story, and then having the time to do that discernment. We're going to talk through some of these steps, but let's put it into practical application. So we've highlighted a few key things throughout the last several slides that Lizzy went through. How do we boil that down now into a story? And I think that we have two different frameworks here for sort of a one-slide story that tells a lot of information very quickly. And the first, this is sort of a legal department version. This tells that story through the lens of how we view things as the law department. This may or may not be appropriate for your board, depending on your board, but we're going to show you another example in a minute that may actually line up better. But if you're doing a business review, you're talking with the C-suite, you're talking with the heads of strategic business units or other folks that are key stakeholders within the company, this can be a great framework because it shows those four focal areas that you're constantly balancing, but the data that we've taken out and chosen to include on these slides highlights our ways to push towards the goals of the business. So when we look at the effectiveness, we want to talk about those matter success scores, right? Our matter success score, now you see how we've converted it to that mean average of a 9.0. We had 40% achieved a 10 out of 10, but as Lizzy talked about, that didn't necessarily tell the full spectrum. Well, our mean score is a 9.0 out of 10. That's a pretty good score. We want to talk about, hey, as a department, we're very effective because we meet our definition of success very often. The matter volume, we want to talk about the increase there so we can show how much more work we're doing. And we've added that time component now. It's up 15% compared to 2023. We could probably even update this and do a comparison to 2024 now. It's a little early in the year. Obviously, to do a comparison, we have to compare Q1 to Q2. We opted in this case to go with a full year 24 to a full year 23 result. Just a little bit more effective way for us to tell the story in terms of that overall matter volume. So we're telling a longer time period, the full year of 24 versus just the first quarter of 25. We talk about that improvement in cycle days. It's down, or cycle time, it's down to 170 days, but that's a 10-day improvement. So again, adding the context we talked about in the earlier slides. Bringing in that idea of we're increasing our effectiveness because we hired an AI specialist, and that ties into the broader goal of the business that we are trying to be ready for that AI transition the business is moving towards. And we talked about the retention. Retention currently sits at 85%. That's a 15% improvement over 23. So we reframed that in terms of how we talked about it. We put just the raw score in there, but also the overall business is looking at it in terms of improvement in retention as opposed to reduction in turnover. So we're framing it that way in our presentation. In terms of our efficiency, 95% of our matters met budget. That's the banner headline, right? That's what we want to talk about. We're very conscientious stewards of the overall finances of the business. 95% of our matters met budget. Legal spend is only 0.3% of revenue. That's in line for businesses of our size. We're about a $4 billion a year business. We found benchmarking data that coincidentally just happens to be available through the Thomson Reuters Institute, but we're 0.03% of revenue. We can talk about that and benchmark it so that we're setting an industry standard. And because we know the organic growth of the revenue in the business, talking about our legal spend as a percentage of revenue, we can actually show favorability as a percentage of revenue without having to say our spend went up by $2 million, whatever the number might be. We're not necessarily talking about how much our spend increased. Even if it did, we're talking about it in terms of the percentage of revenue impact. Law firm rates, we're talking about, Lizzy talked about how we tell that story. We're tiering work, so we're actually capturing a 1.3% savings on average per timekeeper hour, where the average industry increase is 6.4%. Those are real numbers, by the way. The 6.4%, that was the average industry increase for an agreed rate in 2024. So to see that type of a change, that's not out of the realm of possibility for legal departments. 25% of our work being done by fixed fee, again, trying to move more towards that budget accountability. 100% of our NDA work automated, and 45% of our total spend is allocated internally. We're trying to find that balance of internal versus external resources. For the protection, NDA adoption is at 40% in month one of our legal front door rollout. We had a target of 25%, so we're doing really well there. putting it again in context of the goal we were driving towards. So we overachieved there. We have a new vendor engaged looking at ongoing risk or AI risk scanning. We brought in an ALSP. That again goes towards our budget favorability, but also that forward-looking, how are we protecting the business long-term? We have 85% of our business units mapped, and we mitigated a $500,000 penalty through our risk mitigation and risk scanning exercises. That's a really favorable story for our department. And 89% of our new disputes are resolved without litigation. That's a key result, right? We're talking about how do we spot those risks, how do we mitigate them, how do we plan for them, how do we avoid them, right? And if we can avoid the potential problems with litigation, we want to do that, and we want to show that we're very effective at that. In that enablement, the EU AI Act guide we released, and we also produced a new roadmap for the EU. Remember, the department or the business goal of moving into the EU, particularly France and Germany, as key goals for the business. Well, we're proactively working in that direction. In doing so, we're enabling the growth of the business into those markets. We didn't wait for somebody to come to us and say, oh, hey, we want this, we want to maybe look at going to the EU. What do we need to think about? And now we're being reactive. No, we were aware of that, and we proactively went out and produced these things. The legal front door rollout facilitates faster access to strategic opportunities. We've talked on a couple of slides ago how it's speeding our time to trial, and it's putting better tools in the hands of our sales teams in terms of who they can work with collaboratively externally. So we're facilitating that access to those strategic opportunities. 90% of legal is trained on our product pipeline, so we're getting closer to the business. What do we actually sell? How well do we understand that so that we're much more commercially attuned in the business, in the advice that we're providing? And then that score of legal understands our business. That score is up to an 8.9. We really want to highlight that we're improving on that. And even if we wanted to refine that a little bit, add in that context that it's a 0.9 percentage point improvement, or it's up from an 8.0 compared to last year. There's different ways we can talk about that metric, but just getting that key result out there that we have a score of 8.9, we're really striving to understand the business, and at that 9.0 score, we're doing pretty well at it. This is a great framework to help people understand the various areas of focus that the department has and how we're supporting each of those with the context of the business goals sort of as a background element, or it's in the talk track of how we're talking about these things. If we're talking to the board directly, though, we can be much more blunt, much more forceful in terms of how we're presenting the alignment with the overall business goals. So let's look at that. Remember, for the law department, we saw this on every slide that Lizzy went through. We pointed out on the left-hand side of those slides, we've got the law department's goals right there. Well, the law department's goals were already constructed in line with the business goals. So you see the reflection of those of the overall business goals in these. But developing our new AI-driven products, we're talking again about that EU AI guide, the AI legal specialist to support the rollout of the roadmap, and the AI risk mapping tool that we've implemented with the support of that outside vendor, driving towards that goal of supporting a new AI product suite. Hitting that revenue growth target of 12%, we've got to be very efficient in our operations to do that. We talk about the legal front door, implementing that greater access to those strategic opportunities. NDA creation is down to 3 minutes or 15 minutes now compared to 3 weeks that it used to take to do an NDA, because we've automated 100% of that work, and the usage has increased 3x to 40% in month 1. So we're actually better papered and better protected as a business as well. And the strategy team, as a result, is now faster into trials, and we have better IP protection. So the concerns we had in the past over those large IP litigation matters are significantly mitigated now. We also have 90% of the legal team trained on our product pipeline and understanding increasing that understanding of the business so that we know how we can then enable that support and that drive to that 12% revenue target. We don't want to be the Department of No. We don't want to be the roadblock. We want to be the Waze app. We want to be Google Maps. We want to be the Department of How. How do we get there in an expeditious and efficient way, but in a way that also avoids risks? In terms of the goal of reducing expenses, that company-wide expense challenge, legal spend is 0.3% of revenue now, which is in line with businesses of our size. We've already talked about that, but providing that context and putting it specifically in front of the board, they'll appreciate that benchmark. Overall budget was met by reducing law firm costs through our tiering activities, moving to more predictable pricing models. We talked about 25% of our work now done on fixed fees or AFAs, and by eliminating all internal and external NDA creation costs via the legal front door. And litigation was avoided on 89% of our new disputes. So we're really trying to control those litigation expenses by just avoiding the instances of litigation in the first place. It's not to say that litigation matters aren't going to come our way, but we're doing a better job of avoiding protracted litigation by looking at things like, does it meet our materiality threshold, and how fast can we make these things go away or resolve them in a favorable way. And then that fourth goal that we've implemented as a business, when I'm talking to the board, I'm saying we wanted to take what was the goals of the business and add to that through our own drives. And the way that we wanted to do that was through innovating in our own service delivery. We're talking a lot as a business about how do we innovate our product suite? How do we innovate our go-to-market strategies? When we want to innovate the way that we're delivering services back to the business. So part of that is through that creation of the legal front door, automating 100% of that NDA creation. It's now a self-serve tool, so it's much more streamlined. It's a much easier interface, and it really does serve that goal of enabling the growth of the business so that we're driving towards the revenue and product goals the business has set. We did a stakeholder survey to map upcoming needs, and we're shifting to a more proactive support model, or we shifted to a more proactive support model through 2025 with that goal again of protecting the business, but not so much that we're hindering the enablement of growth. And we're partnering with an alternative vendor for ongoing risk scanning. Instead of going with a traditional law firm, we've opted to go with this AI vendor because now on this risk scanning exercise, we're implementing AI in our own operations, increasing our understanding as we become a more AI-driven business. It's streamlining the revenue growth because we're spotting those risks coming, and it's also reducing expenses because the ALSP is frankly just cheaper to work with than the law firm is. So that bullet point in itself, we've strategically placed that one at the bottom of the slide because that's a really nice way to say what we're doing here encompasses all the other goals that we're driving to, not only as a law department, but as a business as a whole. So it's a very intelligent, strategic decision for us to make as a law department. It's a great message that's going to resonate with the board, at least hopefully if we understand our audience correctly. But Lizzy, we were very intentional in how we structured this slide, right? It wasn't just let's throw a bunch of stuff together. We wanted to have a very clear narrative with that intentional alignment to the goals.
Yes, absolutely. And I think with the board version, you want to really be able to show the progress made. You want to be able to highlight any risks or concerns there might be and do that clearly and show the areas of support. But I think the other thing that's quite important is not just what you say, but how it's presented and the visual aspect of things. We've used a really simple table format here. It's easy enough, anyone can use it, but it's all you need. You don't need an overly complicated structure or graphic. Less is often more. And I think when you're presenting this, you really do want to think about getting the message and the information across in a way that is as clear as possible to understand and just read. Then for them to process and understand what it's telling them, so that ultimately they are able to recommunicate that information. And that's the reason why that's so important is not only to amplify and elevate the story of value of the legal department, but that this is really important business information the board needs to be able to hear and retain and use. So in doing all of this, it's not just the bullet points that you can see and sort of how we've built the story, but there is a visual aspect to it as well.
And I think it's important too to remember, Lizzy, that the time that you have in front of the board isn't necessarily the full amount of time that you have the board's attention, right? Mm-hmm. So the time that you have in the room with the board, you want to be very efficient, you want to be very snappy, you want to be very impactful, and then you want to leave room for questions, right? Because if you're doing it right, the board's going to have questions. They're going to want to dive into some of these things, and you can pivot to where they're asking questions, and you can provide additional information, additional context. A lot of times you also have the opportunity to do a board paper or at least a short brief. So if you want to expand on some of these things or have sort of the flashy full color graphics and really dive in, that's a great opportunity to do that. And in fact, maybe one of the most effective things that you can do is you do the short, snappy version in the room. You wait and leave time for questions. They ask a question. You say, actually, that's a wonderful question. I thought you might ask that. That's on page 3 of the briefing that we provided you. It should be in your packet. And they can go and say, oh, It shows that you're anticipating the needs. To the slide that you started the prior section with, knowing your audience, it shows that you're really in tune. It builds a lot of credibility in that room. And it also then hopefully serves up even more questions, right? I think a great outcome is you never want to walk away having to say, oh, let me go and find more information on that for something that probably should have been provided in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're going beyond the scope and they're digging deeper and deeper and deeper, if it's on the second or third or fourth question that they're asking on a particular subject, you say, that's really a great question. I'm going to go and grab some more information and I'll follow up next week. Now is the point where you've really gotten a lot of engagement. There's a big difference between that answer of, let me go get more information and come back to you on the fourth question than on the first one, right? So if you could create that opportunity to have that next touch point with the board and provide a little bit more information because they're engaged and they want to learn from you, that's fantastic. And that should be something that you want to strive for, drive them to want to ask for more. Don't feel like you have to put everything right up front.
Yeah, definitely. You want to leave them wanting more, so they want you back. You do not want to inundate them with too much information and sort of have them hitting the snooze button during the presentation. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think
great outcome is if they're coming up, like you're up in front of the break, and the first thing that happens is the chairman walks over and says, I had a follow-up question. By all means, bring it on. That's great. That's exactly what we're hoping for.
Yeah, for sure. Just the last point I want to make on the formatting side of things, if you're not already good friends with folks in your business's marketing or brand or comms department, make friends with them because they're going to help you. Once you've got what you want to say, they can really help you to package it in a way that's clear and, nicely communicated, but also that's on brand. And that really speaks volumes. I think that your piece of the board presentation doesn't look out of kilter compared with what finance is presenting or what brand is presenting or operations. So that's they're great friends to have too.
That's such a great point.
So we will leave folks with a few considerations. There's been a lot of practical tips and discussion that we've had here, but we put some thought together. Put some thought to what do we think are just some really important considerations to take away and work on when you're building your one slide story. They don't necessarily work in a sequential order. They're all important and they all interrelate. But make sure you gather your data across all 4 areas. So don't only gather the data that you happen to have, which happens to be in the efficiency bucket, because that will just reinforce the narrative of the legal department as a cost center. You want to then proactively find and gather data. And if you don't have it yet, maybe it's anecdotal to start with, but build towards that. Then refine your results statement. So we've been through that process a bit here with the data that we collected for TriClad. So you're looking at focusing on the result, making sure you've got the right amount of context, but not overly detailed, and that it's punchy and put your best foot first. Then put yourself in the board's shoes. It's about connecting with the audience. So we talked quite a lot about this, but think about who are they? What roles do those individuals play? And what are their priorities and pressures? What will their questions be when they see this information? What will their follow-up question be? And should I be thinking through that in this presentation too? Be honest. So we've referenced this a little throughout. It's not always about just giving the best stats or the best picture of something and only showing, the 40% of results where we got a 10 out of 10. It is about being honest and objective and comprehensive and showing the full picture. So there are ways to reframe things in a more positive tone, but still being honest and representative. And then last, but we've talked about this, Bill, this should probably be number 1, and that is allowing sufficient time. Because even now, we've been working on these materials for this webinar for a while, and we've iterated and reviewed and made it more concise. And even going through this today, having had a little more time and space and coming back to it, I'm seeing ways in which we could make it more concise or adjust this. So really don't starve yourself of that time. It's so important to go through that editorial process, really. So I hope that's been useful and inspired a lot of metrics and value alignment plans going on in legal departments. To help you on your way, we've got some material. So the first piece, which Bill referenced, is our most recent State of the Corporate Law Department report. The QR code there will let you download a copy. And that really speaks to what we've learned about strategic priorities for general counsels in 2025 and what the data says and what our advice is on navigating that. So a great read, enjoy that. And then if you've heard anything here on the webinar that's piqued your interest and you want to learn more, whether it's about the benchmark data that we can offer, or you'd like some help to do some of this for your legal department, or you've just got some questions for us, we'd love to talk about this stuff. We'd love to hear from you. So you can use the QR code there on the right to fill out a form and we'll get in touch with you, or you can reach us directly with our emails there on the bottom left, Lizzy and Bill. So that's what we've got for you today. Hope that's been interesting. We really look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you, and thank you so much, Bill, for joining me on this journey as well.
It's been my pleasure, Lizzy, and I look forward to, for those of you that have listened to the webinar here, I look forward to speaking with you if you want to send an email or if you reach out via the QR code there for additional information. We're happy to help provide anything and everything that you need to get this type of an exercise rolling successfully at your departments.
All right, well, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you soon.